Hi friends, I hope all is well. In my last video, I shared the step-by-step process of making this painted accordion journal from two 22-inch watercolor scraps, from monoprinting the ground layers to assembling the 44-inch journal. We're back for part 2 to begin the collage process for the red, pink, and orange side. As you just saw, I'm using two types of adhesives, Golden's Fluid Matte Medium and Matte Mod Podge. I've been using both in my collage practice because I like the strong hold of Mod Podge for painted papers. The Fluid Matte Medium keeps the transparency when gluing transparent papers, like the dark pink scrap that I just glued on the journal. I prefer to use matte adhesives when working in a journal or a sketchbook because the pages are less likely to stick together when it's closed. I'm introducing this bright yellow paper to have strong color contrast from the beginning. My approach for this journal is to treat it as book art, meaning instead of each page being completely different, the pages on each side will have coordinating colors and similar shape elements. When both sides are completed, the journal will have one cohesive look. This first section will be considered the front cover of the journal. I decided not to add a hard cover because I love the painted ground layer and didn't want to cover it. If you remember from the first video, the two gray painted marks on the first few sections are actually gray-green paint, but it reads as gray. I was monoprinting the other side of the journal, which is dark green, gray-green, and yellow oxide, and some of the green-gray paint got on this side. I'm adding gray transparent paper to tie in with the gray-green painted areas. I switched from using matte Mod Podge to glue the yellow paper to Fluid Matte Medium to glue this transparent paper into place. Fluid Matte Medium keeps the transparency of this paper so it melts into the painted journal page underneath it. I will be using green painted papers on this side, but I want to incorporate another element besides paper. This green oil pastel creates an expressive line that adds movement. I'm moving on to the next section. I love the green layering effect on this paper. It also has some areas of texture. If I remember correctly, the paint was applied partially on the gel plate and partially hand painted. It's an example of a dynamic looking monochromatic paper. This paper unifies with the green scribble on the first section and the green on the other side of the journal, which is mostly green. Using a large amount of it makes a bold statement on this red, pink, and orange side of the journal. Another element that creates a strong color contrast. I'm sizing down the next element because it's a bright color, and I don't want to cover up too much of the original monoprinted ground on this section. I love the design of the lower right area with the pink and orange that trails on to the next section. I'm starting off the third section with green scribbles. I think it adds a nice detail to the painted ground layer. Working on the journal when it's somewhat flat helps me to see the sections that I've already worked on and the ones that aren't. Then I can make good decisions about the elements and marks that need to be made on the current section, so there's continuity and cohesion. So far, there's only two small elements using this yellow paper. Tearing a larger piece of it will unify the yellow elements as well as adding visual tension. I'm not concerned that some of the green scribbles are being covered up. I can always come back and add it on top of the yellow element later if it's visually needed. I don't mind when the elements trail onto another section, but this part of the yellow paper is so tiny that it'll probably come unglued and get damaged. It's best to remove it. The pink section in the upper left seemed a bit plain to me, so I'm adding a small scrap of the transparent dark pink paper. This next section is pretty plain with only the orange and red ombre. I'm tearing the green paper into a size that will cover a fourth of the area. Also, I'm making sure that the right edge is next to the fold, but not over it, for the same reason as the yellow element in the previous section. This is the section where the two 22-inch papers were attached with cloth tape. The way the tape is painted blends in well with the ground layer, so it's not easy to recognize as the area where the two papers are attached. More yellow paper is being added in a similar size to the glued green element. I love the texture of this green paper. It was made by applying a layer of absorbent ground to blank paper. Once it dried, then I applied yellow paint. I have a tutorial on how to make absorbent ground papers that I'll link in the description box. I decided that the green oil pastel scribble would look better if it was applied on top of the yellow element. It adds a nice detail. I'm adding more of the gray transparent paper because this area needed a gray element. Also, it allows some of the orange and red that's on the ground layer to show through. It adds depth to this area. I brought out these light pink papers to use on this and subsequent sections. Even though the yellow paper that's been used already is a light value, these light pink papers won't add as much contrast, which is a good design option. Since this section is mid-tone in value, these new papers will add subtle contrast. The light pink paper itself is subtle. It's mostly light pink paint, but there's a very light hint of green circles. This paper was monoprinted, so the light pink paint was used to pull up the remaining green paint circles off the plate. It could have been the third or even fourth pull, I don't recall. Varying the size of each light pink element will add visual interest, more so than if both were the same size. You probably notice that I tend to leave an element in place before gluing it. I like to see how it looks in that place. It gives me time to decide if I like it in that area, or if I need to move it, or if I need to alter it, or replace it with another element. There needs to be more contrast in this section, so I'm tearing a long, thin piece of the yellow paper. This will add another light value along with color contrast. Likewise, this dark green paper will add dark value contrast along with color contrast. As I talked about previously, these thin, long elements will add visual tension with the two light pink elements because the shapes are very different. Even more visual tension is added with this very thin scrap of dark green. Elements don't need to be large to have a positive impact on the design. I'm adding this gray transparent paper to this section, just a small element to tie in with the other sections that have the same paper. Using the same papers throughout this side of the journal brings more continuity and cohesion. At this point, I'm starting to get into a faster flow of creating. I didn't need to take so long to decide on the placement of the elements. It was pretty much glue as I go. I knew what color papers I was going to use for continuity and cohesion. The design is solid, so I can easily decide on the size and shape of the elements. Also, where to add marks with the green oil pastel. As you will see soon, I started working on two sections at once. I wanted this pink transparent paper to overlap onto the next section. I had to decide how many elements I wanted underneath it on the current section and on the adjoining one. I wanted to cover the sliver of unpainted area on the ground layer that's on both sections. It was an easy decision to glue the yellow element on the current section. There are many scraps at this point in the collaging process, so a long, narrow, dark green one fit perfectly in the section next to it. I like the top area, the layered orange paint that trails over both sections, so just adding the pink transparent paper was enough in that area. I haven't used the green oil pastel in a while. All that was needed on the left side was 3 squiggly lines. Then I could focus on finishing the next section. To keep the continuity and cohesion, I'm adding a small yellow paper in the lower left and a scrap of gray transparent paper in the upper right. Then the last thing to add is 2 long squiggly lines to match the small squiggly lines on the previous section. We're winding down this collaging session. We started this video by working on the front cover, and now we're finishing by working on the back cover. The front cover has a lot of elements. For the back cover, I wanted a statement element, so I chose to tear a large piece of the yellow paper. I haven't used much of this light pink paper, and it wasn't used on the front cover. Using it on the back cover helps to differentiate between the two covers. As you can see, I'm gluing each element as I work on this section. Again, at a certain point, you get into a creative flow with this type of journal. I did when the design developed during the previous section. It can happen earlier if you have a solid design plan ahead of time. I had a vague design idea with the papers I pulled, but not a concrete plan. The large green circles adds to the bold statement on the back cover. Also, it's a shape that hasn't been used before on the other sections. I'm adding one last transparent paper. The final step is to add a thin layer of fluid matte medium over the whole finished side to seal it. It's a journal that'll be opened and closed like a book, not a collage that is hung on the wall or created in a sketchbook. The fluid matte medium protects the journal from wear. Also, it's a necessary step to apply it to the oil pastel mark so it won't smear. That wraps up part 2 of this series. In the next video, we'll work on the other side that's dark green, gray green, and yellow oxide, and do a flip through of the finished journal. If you haven't watched part 1, I'll link the playlist in the description box. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching. Take care.